Some of our most interesting and mysterious stories have come from China, where secrecy is a national pastime. This next video is intriguing in two ways, and it presents a pair of riddles that may or may not be connected. August 2020, it's rush hour on a stormy day in Xinjiang City in northeast China. A motorist has his camera focused on a large residential building that is under construction. Suddenly, we see something flying into the frame, towards and then behind the building. Suddenly, the building is engulfed in a massive fireball. Let's see that again. The object appears to be a huge flying creature of some sort. As the flash recedes, we see the flying object continue its path away from the building, which amazingly remains intact. Once the video goes viral, it sparks wild internet speculation about fire-breathing dragons.
When we're faced with a video that suggests that something like a dragon flew over China and breathed fire, so many people are willing to jump on that bandwagon. That says a lot about human beings, both good and bad.
Modern-day encounters with what some feel are flying dinosaurs like the pterosaur, which boasted a 30-foot wingspan, are not uncommon in some parts of the world.
I've interviewed dozens of eyewitnesses who swear that they've seen these living pterosaur creatures flying around in modern times. In Papua New Guinea, they're known as the ropin.
The ropin, also known as the demon flyer, is said to be a monstrous creature that's terrified the natives of Papua New Guinea, which is further south on the Pacific Rim than China. In 1986, a man was even said to have been killed by a ropin and eaten in front of his fellow villagers.
While it seems highly improbable that these animals could still be around, there are many sightings and accounts, and I think we can't totally rule out the possibility.
But even if we entertain the notion that this could be a relic pterosaur, that wouldn't explain the massive explosion. Some internet sleuths put forward another theory involving secret Chinese laser weapons. As recently as July of 2021, a research team in Shanghai announced they had achieved a technological breakthrough that will allow them to build the most powerful laser on the planet. Remember, we have two questions to answer here. Not only what caused that big flash, but what was that thing we see in the air? And just so you know, we tried tracking down whoever shot the video with no luck, which is always reason to ask if the footage is even real. So, our experts have plenty to sort out. Let's get to it. Our wildlife biologist, Dr. Stephanie Schuttler, considers whether or not the flying dino theory has wings.
It doesn't seem to be actively flying. It seems to be gliding. We don't really see any movement of the wings at all.
Dr. Schuttler also notices another key detail when she zooms in on the image.
And it doesn't seem to have like a center body shape at all. So I don't think it's an animal of any sort. It could be like a piece of tarp or a very big piece of plastic or something like that floating in the wind.
So the flying object is confounding us so far. But what about the flash? Maybe it's separate from the object. Our military expert, Tim McMillan, addresses the theory that it's from a space-based laser, maybe a test.
Some of the challenges that any type of laser is going to face is atmospheric refraction. In this video, we see rain, we see haze, fog. All of that is going to greatly reduce any energy any type of laser is going to have. And so you're not going to get an explosion from a laser. So I can say we're not looking at a laser weapon here.
Interesting fact, it was just announced that the U.S. is developing a laser weapon to shoot down the new Chinese hypersonic missiles we mentioned earlier. But that would be used in space, where atmospheric refraction isn't a factor. So it all comes down to video forensic expert Michael Primo. He notices that the flying object seems to have passed the building before the fireball.
Based on this flight path alone, it does not appear that this object created or caused this explosion in this way.
Primo also finds a telltale sign that the video may have been doctored.
At frame 8740, there is a white flash that occurs across the whole screen right before the alleged explosion. So this appears to be a spot where whoever created this recording intentionally avoided the opportunity to see an edit to deceive the viewer.
After further analysis, we also uncovered a report released by Chinese state media that cites the cause of the massive fireball as a random bolt of lightning striking a high-voltage power line near an unfinished residential compound. So, we know what caused the flash. It was lightning striking nearby power lines. That doesn't explain what was flying around before the lightning strike. But thanks to our ace forensic video expert, we're confident declaring that part of the video a pianju. That's Chinese for hoax. September 2018, Saskatchewan, Canada. A local fishing guide is going about a normal day in his lodge when he spies something strange out his window. Something dark and hairy is huddled on the ground amongst the trees. At first, it looks like a small bear, and then it stands and nearly triples in height. It's a huge wolf, and we only understand its scale when it lunges at the regular-sized dog who's defensively barking. The animals quarrel until the man goes to intervene. Let's see that again.
This large shape suddenly becomes animated and springs up and charges at the dog. And much to my shock and horror, it appears to be a wolf of mind-boggling proportions. It's truly monstrous.
Field researcher Ken Gerhardt tells us of the giant wolf's prominent stature in folklore.
There have long been legends of monstrous, bloodthirsty wolves. In France, we have the beast of Gévaudan. In Alaska, there's something known as the Amarok, or demon wolf. And nearby in the Nahanni Valley of Canada, we have something known as the Wahila. The Nahanni Valley is also known as the Headless Valley because the decapitated bodies of prospectors and trappers have been found there and have been linked to the legend of this giant wolf-like Wahila. So we have these long enduring traditions of giant wolves, and we have to wonder if there might be a grain of truth to this legend.
Some have speculated that this wolf might be more familiar than we think, a creature not from the realm of legend, but from our own prehistory.
The largest gray wolves, Canis lupus, have been known to achieve weights of about 200 pounds. But if we go back over 10,000 years ago to the Pleistocene epoch, there were these monstrous bone-crushing wolves known as dire wolves, Canis dirus. A relic population of dire wolves may have survived as recently as 4,000 years ago in Arkansas's Ozarks. We could be dealing with a dire wolf genetic code that's been locked into modern wolves and is now resurfacing in this remarkable individual.
An interesting note about that French beast of Gévaudan. Though that monster wolf lived on and kept killing after being driven off by a young boy, that kid was rewarded for his bravery. King Louis XV paid for his education. Now let's get the educated opinion on this specimen. Could there be something off about this wolf's genetics? Some sort of mutation? There is a phenomenon called an atavism, where a creature has traits from its ancestors preserved in its genes. However, it's unlikely in this case, as atavisms aren't likely to manifest in the form of a canine size. An extra toe is more likely. Then what's going on here? Wildlife biologist Stephanie Shuttler isn't crying wolf, she's crying hoax.
To me, it didn't look like the dog was in danger. That was really suspicious. So that's what makes me think that it was CGI.
When someone suspects a fake, we call in Michael Primo, our forensic video analyst.
It's my conclusion that there is no additional information that was introduced into these recordings that would be similar to something that was CGI'd or manufactured.
With the clip appearing to be legitimate, biologist Floyd Hayes discusses the creature's resemblance to the dire wolf.
The dire wolf is a little bit larger than a wolf with a larger head and smaller feet.
What's more, the dire wolf had shorter, stockier legs to keep them warmer during the cold winter months. The wolf we see here is proportioned much more similarly to our modern-day canine. So with all other possibilities unlikely, Hayes says it's just a gray wolf. But there's a surprise. He did a size calculation and found this specimen to be one of the largest wolves ever documented. Hayes says the dog looks like a type of husky, which tend to grow a little over 2 feet tall and around 60 pounds. And the wolf looks about 1.5 times larger than the dog here. Hayes guesses this wolf is about 3 feet tall and 6.5 feet from end to end. That's longer than most men are tall. And what's more, it's nearly a record. Compared to the largest wolf ever recorded, Hayes thinks this is only half an inch shorter. So this wolf is truly a gargantuan. Incredible. Our verdict, an actual wolf who just happens to be quite large for his species. This is not a supernatural creature, but he is an outlier. How he got that big is still a mystery. But we know he's a loner who probably branched off to form his own pack. October 2016, Craig McKay of Alaska's Bureau of Land Management is overlooking the Chena River in Fairbanks when he notices something extremely peculiar in the water. It looks to be around 20 to 25 feet long, and when we zoom in, it appears to be swimming against the current.
I looked down and saw this really bizarre object. It was much larger than anything I'd seen in the river, and it was undulating or swinging back and forth in the current. It was really spooky.
Given the location of this discovery, field researcher Ken Gerhardt says we should consider the local folklore.
In Alaska, we do have a number of legends of water creatures. The Inuit culture talks about something called the Tizharuk, which is a long serpentine animal with a long head, a prominent tail fin. There are many tales of the Tizharuk actually snatching people off of bridges or out of canoes and devouring them voraciously.
Gerhardt says descriptions of the Tizharuk vary, but the most terrifying form is said to be a giant eel-like creature with transparent skin, which not only allows observers to see still digesting victims, but also makes the creature less visible when stalking its prey.
In addition, we have the Lake Iliamna monster, which is also known as the Jigignak. This particular monster has been reported several times. It's described as being 10 to 30 feet in length, with a torpedo-shaped body and kind of a dull aluminum color. So, we have to ask the question, could this be related to those stories?
Early stories of the Jig-Ignak described fish-like monsters traveling in groups and attacking canoes. So is that, or one of its descendants, what we're looking at here? Let's let the experts decide. Marine biologist Dr. Shay Conger says if this thing were a snake, it's unlikely to have accumulated snow on its back. And as for serpents,
there's no water snakes in Alaska. This is because reptiles and amphibians are exotherms. They're reliant on the environment to maintain their body heat, and there really isn't enough heat to allow these species to persist in this area.
So Dr. Conger turns for clues to the hydrology of the scene, the motion of the water.
It seems to kind of be moving back and forth through the water, as you would expect an animal with a tail to be swimming against the current.
But hold on, look again.
When the video zooms out a little bit, you can actually see that this object doesn't seem to be moving forward at all. Rather, it's just fixed in place and being hit by the moving current downriver. Therefore, I conclude this isn't a biological object. Rather, it's some type of debris like a piece of rope or a fishing line encased in ice.
So there you have it. Our verdict, based on Dr. Conger's hydrology analysis, this is a frozen rope. But sightings of Alaskan lake and river monsters continue to this day. Are they all misidentifications? Or is there really something down there? We'll keep looking for more video until we have an answer. October 2019, near the Vrbas River in Bosnia, archaeology professor Ivana Panzic is studying the ruins of a medieval fortress. But the discovery of a relic under the choppy rapids shocks Panzic and her team. It's a sword lodged straight into a stone in the riverbed about 36 feet below the surface. Despite being down there for probably hundreds of years, the sword is remarkably well preserved.
We did several dives to decide what we're gonna use during the excavation. The whole process of excavating the sword took us 2 days.
The team manages to free the blade, but how this sword got in this stone in the first place is a mystery. Could it be the very Excalibur from the King Arthur legend? No concrete evidence exists that a real King Arthur actually ruled parts of England, beyond what was written about him centuries later. Some historians think he could be based on a real 5th century Romano-British leader named Ramathias, who fought invading Goths. Details are scarce, but even if Arthur is entirely fictional, could the story of Excalibur have inspired medieval copycats?
It's possible that if this legend of King Arthur did make its way into Bosnia-Herzegovina, that individuals were attempting to recreate this story, to encase a sword in stone so that the rightful heir of this kingdom could pull the sword out in the same way that King Arthur did.
Or maybe it's the other way around. Could this real sword in the stone be the inspiration for the King Arthur legend? So the big question is, could a sword really penetrate a rock? Look, that's a tough one. Most rocks are much harder than any pointed steel blade. So how can we explain this strange find? It's time to convene our own Knights of the Round Table. Maritime archaeologist Peter Campbell says based on the testing done by the museum in Bosnia, the dates don't line up for it to have belonged to King Arthur or to have inspired his legend.
This sword dates to the 13th to 15th century AD. The legendary King Arthur predates this sword by nearly 1,000 years. So we can definitely discard the notion that this sword is in any way Excalibur.
And what about the notion that the noblemen of the nearby fortress could have an Arthur copycat? Yes, it would be strange to do such a thing in a river, and Campbell agrees.
One hypothesis that's been raised is the sword was put in the stone deliberately as part of some sort of king-making ceremony. We can effectively discard this notion because the sword was found at 36 feet, which is far deeper than they would have been able to dive in the 13th to 15th century AD.
Still, he believes, based on what he sees, the sword belonged to someone important.
We can see that it is finely crafted. It was very expensive metal used in its manufacture. And all of that indicates that this was probably the sword of a noble person.
And that leads him to think there is some ritualistic reason it's in the water.
There's actually a very well-developed tradition, especially in Europe, of discarding of swords and armor in rivers, lakes, and bogs. And this dates from the Bronze Age all the way up through the medieval period. If somebody wins a major battle, they can discard the sword into the river as some sort of ritual offering.
And as to how it ended up lodged in the stone.
Frequently, we see heavy objects deposited in rivers that work their way down with the current into sediment or into rocks. And then it has many centuries of wiggling and burrowing down into the cracks. The metal is also corroding, attaching it to the rocks, and sediment is filling in, and it's becoming rock itself. This explains why the sword appeared to be stuck in the rock. In fact, these are normal site formation processes, as we call them, for river environments.
So, our verdict? This is a geological phenomenon. The sword didn't penetrate the stone built up around the sword. However, the sword's true origin and owner still remain a mystery.